The conference room door slammed open at 9:40 a.m. on a Thursday. Why did the client terminate us? Director Carolyn Westfield's voice cracked through the bullpen like a whip. Her face was flushed, papers trembling in her grip. Anna, my office. Now. I saved my spreadsheet without hurrying. Let her wait. I'd been waiting 3 days myself. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that persistent electrical buzz that becomes white noise until moments like this, when every sound sharpens into hyperclarity. Around me, keyboards stopped clicking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. 43 employees suddenly found their monitors fascinating, eyes carefully averted from the unfolding drama. I pushed back from my desk, straightened the photo frame showing Sophie at her 8th grade graduation, her smile wide, braces gleaming, holding her honor roll certificate, and walked toward Carolyn's office with the same measured pace I'd use crossing a minefield. My heels clicked against the laminate flooring, each step deliberate, unhurried. Because this wasn't panic. This was vindication. My name is Anna Jonathan. I've spent 11 years in client relations at Raw Technologies, a mid-tier software consulting firm specializing in enterprise resource planning implementations. We're not the biggest player, companies like Oracle and SAP dominate that space, but we've carved out a respectable niche serving financial institutions too large for boutique consultancies but too specialized for the megacore. 11 years building relationships brick by brick, learning that trust isn't about flash, it's about showing up when systems crash at 2 a.m. and walking clients through disaster recovery without panic. It's about remembering that a CFO's daughter just started at Northwestern studying economics, or that the VP of operations despises surprises more than he hates budget overruns, or that the infrastructure director's mother is battling stage 3 cancer and sometimes meetings need rescheduling with grace rather than frustration. I'd managed the Hillcrest financial account for 4 years. 42 months of flawless deliverables, quarterly reviews that earned handshakes and contract renewals, and a relationship with their CTO, Malcolm Reeves, built on something radically simple: I never promised what I couldn't deliver. Never overpromised to close a deal. Never buried bad news in corporate jargon. The account generated $2.3 million annually for Raw Technologies. Not our largest, but steady. Reliable. The kind of client who paid invoices within 15 days instead of dragging to 60, who provided referrals when asked, who renewed contracts without exhausting legal reviews. Then Carolyn decided I wasn't enough. 3 days earlier, Monday morning, she'd called me into her office with Ian Parrish at her side. Ian was newer, 18 months with Raw Technologies, recruited from a competitor called Vertex Solutions with promises of fast-track advancement and equity options that vested in 3 years. Polished Italian shoes that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, perpetual smile, the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having failed publicly or spectacularly enough to learn humility. He was talented, I'll give him that. Smart, articulate, capable of reading a room and adjusting his pitch midstream. The kind of operator who could sell complex solutions if you gave him 10 minutes and eye contact. His last performance review, which I'd seen in passing, rated him exceptional in client presentation skills. But talent without wisdom is just expensive liability waiting for the right circumstances to detonate. Anna, we're making a strategic shift with Hillcrest, Carolyn said, barely glancing up from her monitor where she was reviewing what looked like quarterly projections. Her office smelled like the lavender diffuser she kept near her window, supposed to promote calm decision-making, according to some leadership podcast she'd mentioned in our last team meeting. Ian will be taking point on the account moving forward. Effective immediately. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples I could already trace to their inevitable conclusions. Hillcrest specifically requested continuity in their last quarterly review, I said carefully, keeping my voice measured and professional. Malcolm and I have established protocols for escalation. Ian builds trust faster than you, Carolyn interrupted. Sharp. Final. Her eyes finally lifted to meet mine with that look, the one executives get when they've already made the decision and are simply enduring the formality of informing you. The look that says your input is irrelevant. He's got a stronger executive presence. Hillcrest is entering a growth phase, and frankly, we need someone who can match their energy. Someone who thinks bigger, sees opportunities where others see risks. The subtext was clear: you're competent but uninspiring. Reliable but not exciting. The steady hand that keeps things stable but doesn't generate the aggressive growth numbers that impress board members or justify executive bonuses. Ian's smile widened slightly. I watched him, cataloging the gleam in his eye, not malicious, exactly. Just hungry. The look of someone who believes their turn has finally arrived and they're not about to let something as trivial as institutional knowledge or relationship history slow them down. My father was career military. 26 years in the army, retiring as a colonel after tours in Germany, Kuwait, and 2 rotations through Afghanistan. He taught me early, when you're outflanked and outgunned, don't argue. Regroup. Assess. Wait for terrain to shift. Fighting the wrong battle at the wrong time is how careers end and resentments calcify into permanent grudges that poison entire organizations. Understood, I said, folding my hands in my lap. I'll prepare transition documentation. Carolyn blinked, perhaps expecting resistance or tears or the kind of emotional display that would justify her decision, make her feel less like she was making a mistake. Good. Ian, Anna will bring you up to speed by Wednesday. Anna, I appreciate your professionalism about this. Professionalism. The word people use when they want compliance without complaint, acquiescence without pushback. I spent Monday afternoon and most of Tuesday compiling 4 years of institutional knowledge into a 73-page document. Client preferences mapped against personality profiles I developed over dozens of meetings. Communication styles broken down by individual stakeholder. Malcolm preferred email for complex topics but phone calls for urgent matters, never text messages which he considered unprofessional. CFO Catherine Brenner wanted executive summaries with supporting details available but not foreground, everything in PDF format because she printed and annotated documents. Infrastructure Director Leonard Sue responded best to technical specifications with business implications clearly articulated. Appreciated diagrams over lengthy prose. I documented the failed platform migration attempt from 18 months prior, the one that had cost them $250,000 in sunk costs and nearly ended our contract before I'd managed to salvage the relationship through 3 weeks of daily crisis meetings. I outlined the delicate détente we'd achieved with their security team after a compliance audit revealed gaps in our initial implementation, gaps that required diplomatic negotiation rather than defensive justification. I included notes on holiday scheduling preferences, response time expectations under different scenarios, and the fact that Malcolm's assistant, Gloria, was the actual gatekeeper who determined meeting priorities and could be won over with prompt email responses and genuine appreciation. Every hard-won lesson from 4 years of relationship maintenance, typed into a document I knew Ian wouldn't fully read. People like Ian rarely do, they trust their instincts, their charisma, their ability to improvise. They don't believe in institutional knowledge until its absence costs them something significant. Ian skimmed the first 10 pages during our transition meeting Tuesday afternoon, coffee cooling beside his laptop while he scrolled with increasing speed, nodding occasionally but clearly not absorbing the depth of information. This is great background, he said, tapping his expensive pen, a Mont Blanc, I noticed, against the binder I'd printed for him. Some people still prefer paper for critical documents, I'm one of them. Digital files get lost in folder structures, overwritten in version control mistakes, forgotten in the endless scroll of shared drives. But honestly, I think a fresh approach might be exactly what Hillcrest needs. Sometimes too much history makes you cautious, you know? You start seeing obstacles everywhere instead of opportunities. Analysis paralysis, right? I knew. I also knew that caution had kept us from losing the account 3 separate times. Once over budget disputes when Catherine questioned our hourly rates and threatened to put the contract out for competitive bidding, once during scope creep battles when their project manager kept expanding requirements without authorization and we had to diplomatically reset boundaries, and once when a junior developer on our team made disparaging comments about their legacy systems in an email he accidentally sent to Malcolm instead of our internal Slack channel. Malcolm values predictability, I offered, making one last attempt to impart critical intelligence. He's risk-averse by nature. His background is traditional IT management, not innovation-driven transformation. When you pitch ideas, he needs to see detailed risk mitigation strategies or he'll. People surprise you when you give them permission to think bigger. Ian's smile never wavered. He had this habit of maintaining eye contact just a beat too long, like a sales technique learned from an overpriced executive seminar. Trust me, Anna. I've turned skeptics into champions before. At Vertex, I took a stagnant manufacturing account from $800,000 to $2.1 million in 18 months by helping them see possibilities instead of limitations. It's about vision, not caution. There's a certain kind of operator who mistakes confidence for competence, charisma for connection, and aggressive growth for sustainable relationship management. I've watched them flame out across my career, brilliant until the moment complexity exceeds their charm, or until they encounter a client who values substance over style, consistency over innovation. But explaining that would have sounded like bitterness. Sour grapes from someone who'd just been replaced by a younger, more dynamic colleague. So I nodded, wished him genuine luck despite my reservations, and walked away. My husband, Terrence, found me that evening in our kitchen, staring at a glass of Pinot Noir I'd poured but hadn't touched. Our house is a modest split level in a neighborhood that's perpetually up and coming, where the coffee shops have reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs but the public schools still struggle with funding gaps. Sophie was upstairs finishing homework, her music bleeding through the ceiling, some indie artist I didn't recognize but that seemed to involve a lot of melancholy piano and introspective lyrics about teenage heartbreak. "They're making a mistake," Terrence said simply, leaning against the counter. He works in operations management for a pharmaceutical distributor, so he understands corporate politics without being consumed by them, sees the patterns without getting cynical. Maybe. I swirled the glass, watching the wine catch the light from our outdated pendant fixture. Or maybe Ian really is better at this. Maybe I've gotten too comfortable. Too cautious. Maybe I've been so focused on risk mitigation that I stopped seeing growth opportunities. Maybe steady and reliable isn't enough anymore. Terrence knows me well enough not to argue with my self-doubt. He just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Guess we'll find out." He's right more often than I give him credit for. Tuesday afternoon, around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed, a text from Malcolm Reeves. Just seeing his name on my screen made my stomach tighten. New point of contact? What's happening? Nobody told me about changes. I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Protocol said defer to Ian now. Build the transition. Support the new relationship. Don't undermine leadership decisions, even ones you disagree with fundamentally. Strategic realignment, I typed back, choosing my words carefully. Ian Parrish will be your primary going forward. He's excellent, sharp, creative thinker. You're in good hands. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. No response came. That absence of response told me everything. Malcolm wasn't the type to leave messages hanging unless he was either very busy or very unhappy. Given that our quarterly review was in 2 weeks and he'd typically confirm details by now, I suspected the latter. Strongly. That night, I lay awake thinking about trust, how fragile it is, how long it takes to construct, how quickly it shatters. Trust in business relationships is like structural integrity in buildings. You can't see it, but it's holding everything together. Remove a load-bearing wall because you don't like the layout, and you might not notice the problem immediately, but eventually the ceiling collapses. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Made chamomile tea I didn't want, scrolled through news I didn't retain, and thought about the first time I'd met Malcolm Reeves 4 years ago at their headquarters in the financial district. He'd been skeptical then too. Raw Technologies was replacing a consultant he'd trusted, someone named Barbara who'd retired after 15 years managing Hillcrest's account. Malcolm had made it clear in our first meeting, sitting in his corner office with its view of the river, that I was on probation. "Earn it," he'd said bluntly. "Don't tell me how great you are. Show me." So I did. For 6 months, I showed up. Answered emails within 2 hours during business days, 30 minutes for anything marked urgent. Delivered on every commitment, even small ones that wouldn't have been noticed if missed. Admitted when I didn't know something rather than bluffing my way through. Built relationships not just with Malcolm but with every stakeholder who could make our work easier or harder. When their systems crashed during a quarterly close, a storage failure that threatened to delay financial reporting to their board, I'd driven to their office at midnight with our senior engineer and stayed until 6 a.m. helping restore data and verify integrity. Malcolm found us in their server room at dawn, bleary-eyed and running on vending machine coffee and sheer determination, and said, "Okay. You've earned it." That's the moment when an account becomes a relationship. When a client stops seeing you as a vendor and starts seeing you as a partner, someone who'll be there when things fall apart. You can't fast-track that with charisma or aggressive pitches. It's built through consistency, reliability, and being there when everything goes wrong and everyone else is pointing fingers. Wednesday morning, Ian sent a company-wide email announcing a transformational strategy session with Hillcrest's executive team scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. Bold move, I thought, reading it in my inbox. Malcolm typically preferred incremental changes, methodical planning, roadmaps reviewed and approved before implementation. He'd once told me over lunch that his father had lost a small business by expanding too fast on borrowed money, and he'd carried that lesson into his professional life. Growth is good, reckless growth is catastrophic. But Ian was convinced he could pitch an ambitious platform migration, moving Hillcrest from their current ERP system to a cloud-native architecture that would enable real-time analytics, mobile access, and artificial intelligence integration for predictive modeling. Higher revenue for raw technologies, bigger scope, more prestige. The kind of project that gets featured in industry publications and wins consulting awards at conferences. I saw the proposal in the shared drive Wednesday afternoon. 53 slides, heavy on vision and light on specifics or risk analysis. Aggressive 18-month timeline for something that typically requires 30 months minimum with a client like Hillcrest. Significant cost increase, the proposal estimated $4.7 million over 3 years, more than double their current spend. Technology stack built around cutting-edge platforms that Hillcrest had explicitly rejected 8 months prior during a feasibility study I'd conducted with Leonard over several detailed sessions. I remembered that conversation clearly. Leonard had said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, "We're a financial institution, not a tech startup. We need proven, stable, boring technology. I don't care about being cutting edge. I care about security, compliance, and zero downtime. Can you deliver that?" Ian's proposal was the exact opposite: exciting, innovative, risky. The kind of project that either transforms a company or becomes a cautionary tale in business school case studies about consulting disasters. My cursor hovered over the comment function in our document management system. I could flag the concerns, cite the previous analysis, remind Ian of the documented preferences and the history he was ignoring. I could save him from himself, save Carolyn from embarrassment, save the account from jeopardy. Instead, I closed the document. There's a lesson my father taught me during a particularly brutal stretch of my adolescence, when I'd been passed over for a leadership position I'd earned in favor of someone's nephew who'd recently joined our school's debate team. I'd wanted to fight, to appeal, to make people see the injustice and correct it. He'd said, standing in our garage where he was rebuilding an old Mustang engine, "Sometimes you have to let people learn the expensive way. Your job isn't to save them from their choices. It's to be ready when the dust settles. Competence is patient. It doesn't need vindication, just opportunity." I went back to my other work. Thursday afternoon, Ian strutted past my desk, blazer slung over his shoulder, practicing his pitch under his breath. He had this physical presence, 6'2", athletic build from the triathlons he mentioned frequently in office conversations, the kind of person who looked like success even before achieving it. Carolyn intercepted him near the break room where the good coffee machine lived, and I caught fragments of their conversation over the ambient office noise, phrases like game changer and exactly the vision they need and "this is how you build a premier consulting practice" floating across the space between desks. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. Malcolm Reeves. The caller ID made my heart rate spike. I let it ring twice before answering. Not playing games, just steeling myself for what I knew was coming. "Anna." His voice was tight, controlled in that way that signals barely restrained frustration. "I need context. Ian's pushing a Friday meeting I didn't request, with an agenda that looks nothing like our agreed roadmap. He sent a calendar invite to Catherine, Leonard, and 3 other executives without checking availability first. Catherine is in Boston for a board meeting and now she's furious that we're scheduling around her as if her time doesn't matter. What happened to our Q3 plan? What happened to the security updates we discussed last month?" There it was. The moment where I could be the bridge, smooth things over, coach Ian through the relationship complexity, protect the account like I'd protected it a dozen times before from misunderstandings and missteps. Or I could be honest. "Malcolm, I'm no longer on your account. Ian's leading now, and those decisions are his to make." I kept my tone neutral, professional, factual. "I trust you'll communicate your concerns directly with him. He's reachable at his direct line or via email." Silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, could practically feel him recalibrating his understanding of the situation, realizing what had changed. Then, I see. They took you off our account. Strategic realignment, I said, echoing the corporate language without inflection. Without consulting us. Without transition planning. Without asking what we wanted or needed. That's an internal decision for raw technologies. I'm sure it was made with your best interests in mind. Another pause. Longer this time, waited with things unsaid. Anna, level with me. Should I be worried? This was the inflection point. I could reassure him, build Ian up, make this work despite my reservations. I provided extensive documentation to Ian covering everything you need to know about working with your team. If he follows those guidelines, you'll be fine. If he doesn't. I let the sentence hang in the charged silence. I guess you'll know pretty quickly. That's not exactly comforting. I'm not on your account anymore, Malcolm. Comfort isn't my responsibility. But for what it's worth, you've always been a smart judge of whether someone understands your business and respects your priorities. Trust that judgment. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, thank you, Anna. For everything you did over the years. And for being straight with me now when you didn't have to be. He hung up. I sat very still, heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't lied. I hadn't sabotaged anything directly. I'd simply stepped back. Refused to be the safety net for someone who dismissed my expertise as insufficient presence and overly cautious thinking. My desk neighbor, an analyst named Felix Ortega who'd been with the company for 7 years, leaned over the partition. That sounded ominous. That was Malcolm Reeves figuring out that change isn't always improvement. You could have helped. Smoothed it over like you always do. At some point, you have to let people experience the consequences of their decisions. Otherwise, they never learn what works and what doesn't. Friday morning arrived with unusual stillness. I woke early, 5:30 a.m., with that electric anticipation that precedes significant events. Not quite anxiety. More like standing at a starting line, muscles tensed, waiting for the signal. I took extra care getting ready. Navy suit, not my usual business casual. The power outfit. Professional armor. When you know you're walking into a battlefield, you dress accordingly. The office was already humming when I arrived at 7:15. Ian was in early, rehearsing his pitch in the conference room we used for video calls. I could see him through the glass walls, gesturing expansively, running through slides with the intensity of someone preparing for a championship game. Carolyn arrived at 8 o'clock, practically vibrating with anticipation, clutching her reusable coffee tumbler. This was the kind of win that made quarterly reports shine and justified her strategic vision to the executive team. I worked through emails, calm. Detached. Felix kept glancing over the partition like he was watching a nature documentary and couldn't look away from the impending predator-prey encounter. At 9:43 a.m., Ian's desk phone rang. He answered with his signature enthusiasm, that upbeat energy that clients typically found engaging. Ian Parrish, this is great timing, I was just about to. Within 30 seconds, his expression shifted. Confusion bleeding into panic. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he hung up, his face had gone pale, all the confident color drained away. He walked straight to Carolyn's office. Knocked once. Entered without waiting. The door closed. 4 minutes later, the door slammed open. Why did the client terminate us? Carolyn's voice carried across the entire floor, raw and disbelieving. Anna, my office. Now. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked the length of the bullpen at a measured pace. Every eye tracked me. Ian stood frozen beside Carolyn's desk, looking like a man who'd just watched his career implode. I stepped inside. Closed the door gently. Explain, Carolyn demanded, thrusting her phone toward me. The screen showed an email from Malcolm, subject line, contract termination effective immediately. Hillcrest just fired us. Malcolm Reeves said, and I quote, "We no longer have confidence in raw technology's understanding of our organizational needs or priorities." What the hell happened? I glanced at Ian. He wouldn't meet my eyes. What happened, I said quietly, is exactly what I documented would happen if certain protocols weren't followed. Malcolm Reeves is a relationship client. He values predictability, methodical planning, and above all, being heard. He doesn't respond well to surprise pivots or aggressive upselling. Ian was trying to grow the account. Ian tried to pitch a platform migration that Hillcrest explicitly rejected 8 months ago. It's documented in page 47 of the transition files. He scheduled a meeting Malcolm didn't request, with an agenda that ignored their roadmap. He sent calendar invites without checking availability, causing Catherine to miss the meeting while at a board presentation in Boston. I kept my voice even, factual. Malcolm called me yesterday. I told him to communicate directly with his new point of contact. He did. And when Ian dismissed his concerns, I let the sentence hang. Carolyn's jaw worked silently. You could have warned us, she said finally. I provided 73 pages of documentation. I offered guidance during transition. I was told my approach was too cautious. I met her gaze steadily. Was I wrong? The silence stretched. Carolyn sank into her chair. Can you fix this? She asked, and the shift in her tone was remarkable, from command to plea. I'd been expecting this. Maybe. Malcolm might be willing to have a conversation. But I need full authority restored and a commitment that my judgment won't be second-guessed every time someone with better executive presence walks through the door. Carolyn looked at Ian. Then back at me. Done, she said. Whatever you need. I nodded once. I'll reach out this afternoon. No promises. I called Malcolm at 2 p.m. from a quiet conference room. I'd spent the hours drafting my terms, getting Carolyn's signature, filing documentation with HR. The phone rang 3 times. Anna. His voice was guarded. Calling to explain why I'm overreacting? No. I'm calling to apologize on behalf of Raw Technologies and to ask if you're willing to have a conversation about what it would take to rebuild your confidence. He was quiet. You're not going to defend what happened? There's no defense. You were disrespected. Your preferences were ignored. That's inexcusable. Another pause. Then, I told Catherine this morning that if you weren't back as point of contact, we were done. She agreed. And you were right to draw that line. So what now? Now you tell me what needs to happen for us to earn back your trust. And I listen. And I deliver. I could hear him breathing. Considering. I want you back as primary contact, full authority, he said finally. I want the Q3 roadmap back in place. And I want written commitment that no changes happen without my approval. Done. Documentation to you by Monday morning. And Ian? Off your account permanently. Good. He paused. Anna, I'm glad you called. Just a temporary detour. We're back on course now. Send me the paperwork. We'll review it. If everything checks out, we'll reinstate by Tuesday. Thank you, Malcolm. Don't make me regret it. I won't. The contract was reinstated Tuesday afternoon. Malcolm had his guarantees. I had my authority restored. Raw Technologies kept its $2.3 million account. Ian was quietly reassigned to internal projects. That Friday evening, I sat at our kitchen table with Terrence and Sophie, pasta cooling on our plates. So you saved them, Sophie said, eyes wide. After they were mean to you. I saved the relationship, I corrected. There's a difference. Sometimes proving your value is less satisfying than simply knowing it. Terrence squeezed my hand. But you do feel vindicated. I smiled. Maybe a little. Sophie frowned. But if they already knew you were good, why did they replace you? Because sometimes people mistake novelty for improvement. They see someone confident and assume that confidence equals competence. It's a lesson everyone learns eventually, usually the expensive way. Did they learn it? I thought about Carolyn's expression. Ian's pale face. Malcolm's relief. Yeah, I said. I think they did. Sophie asked, Mom, were you scared? When they replaced you? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I admitted. Not scared that I wasn't good at my job. But scared that competence wouldn't matter. That's a different kind of fear, not about your abilities, but about whether your abilities are still valued. But they are valued. They proved that. They did. But I didn't know they would. You have to trust your own judgment even when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong. That takes courage. Monday morning, I arrived to find a note from Carolyn, "Thank you. Let's talk about the VP of Client Relations position when you have time." I stared at it, then tucked it into my drawer. Maybe someday. But for now, I had clients who needed someone who understood that trust isn't built faster, it's built right. My father called that evening. "How's work?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually." That's the tone of someone who just won something. I laughed. "Not won. Just held the line." "Same thing, kiddo. Same thing." And maybe he was right. In a world that rewards flash over substance, sometimes the greatest victory is simply knowing the difference, and refusing to compromise on what matters. I hung up and returned to my kitchen, where Sophie was practicing piano and Terrence was reading on the couch. The ordinary rhythms of a life built on steady foundations. Just the deep, unshakable trust that comes from showing up, day after day, and doing the work that matters. Even when nobody's watching.